First of all, I should thank you first of all for your email. Let's I feel like this needs to be explained. So you are one of the programmers for the Charlotte Film Festival.
I'm one of the judges. There are actually programmers above me who made the final decisions, but I judge narrative shorts and some of the features.
Got it. So you sent me such a nice email. And then I was like, we have to chat on Zoom. And honestly, like that was so nice of you to reach out because a lot of times you just get the sort of blanket rejection from a film festival and like that's it, right? Like it's very rare that a judge or a programmer or anyone would reach out with any kind of like personal note. So that was really kind of you.
Well, now that I've retired, I've decided that whenever I see anything that impresses me or interests me, I try to contact the musician or the filmmaker or the author and let them know there's a human being at the other end who really got something out of the work that they did. It's good to reinforce for an artist that their work not just has merit, but is reaching somebody.
Work so hard on making this thing. You spend so many years just trying to get to the point where you can even shoot it, and then you make it, and then you kind of send it out. And yes, you get to go to festivals and sit in audiences and hear kind of audiences like reacting around you. But a lot of times, like when people are in a theater watching your film, you're not there. So you saw Scrap, we submitted it to the Charlotte Film Festival. It did not get in. But you sent me a really nice email afterwards just saying that you enjoyed the film. And when you sent me that email that you like completely downplayed your career, like you just sent this long email. And then in the end you were like, oh yeah, by the way, I was like the film critic for like the Charlotte Observer for like 40 years, whatever, no big deal. I was like, wait, I'm sorry. What? Like what's going, who is this guy? And then
if you put that up front, it's sort of like, listen to me. I have an authoritative opinion and a deep voice.
Right.
I didn't want to be that guy. I wanted to be, I'm a person in the audience feeling this. And the reason it might be a little different for me is I've seen like 8,000 movies instead of 40 movies.
Yeah.
And so whenever people say to me, this is the best thing I've seen all year, and then I find out they've seen 4 films, it's not much of a judgment. But I see films constantly and have all my life. So for me to take a special interest in something is rare. I mean, it snapped me out of an ordinary sort of, oh, isn't this nice kind of zone.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, what you had said in the email about the character Beth, the character that I play in the film, kind of centering a protagonist who maybe is less likable than we often see on screen. Initially, I think we were getting some feedback where people were like, oh, I really don't like her. Like, I really hate her. Like, and I'm not enjoying in a non-enjoyable way, but hopefully by the end of the movie, people at least understand her.
Well, I think to me, a good film, and this is what the kind of film I like, is a little bit sort of like a bowling ball. You set it down. I'm a former high school team bowler, so there's the analogy. You set the bowling ball down and it sort of looks like, oh, is it going toward the gutter? It's curving. What's it going to do? If it ends up in the pocket and you have a strike, then it doesn't matter. It took an unusual path. Bowling balls don't go straight down the alley and go boom and give you a strike. This film starts out and you think, am I going to like her? I mean, I kind of don't. She seems sort of irresponsible and self-sabotaging. I don't know. That's not, how much do I want to spend time with that person? Well, wait a minute. I get her situation now a little better. Right? I'm coming around. And by the end, the ball's in the pocket and you get the strike. And you really feel like you understand Beth and empathize with Beth. And all of your feeling of, well, she's kind of selfish and she's nuts. Why does she keep ordering this stuff she can't pay for? Then you get why she does that. And you wish she wouldn't. And by the end, when you think she probably isn't going to do that anymore, that ball is right in the pocket. And so I'm willing to make that journey. I don't need a straight line of, what a nice person. And here she is. And, oh, she's getting a better job now. That's really a good thing. That kind of narrative is so commonly told that it has kind of worn thin for me. I like a film that makes me want to go on a journey. I can't hate her, but if I sort of am curious about her, that's enough at the start. And then I learn about her. And then in the end, I do like her and I empathize with her.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I kind of chafe a little bit at that, like save the cat idea in screenwriting where it's like, oh, on page 3 or whatever, like they have to do something to show you that they're going to be a good person. It's sort of like, why? Right? Like, why? Like, why, people are like messy, I think. And, yeah, there's a lot of like unconscious behaviors that I wanted to put in the script that I think sometimes we do things and we're sort of halfway in the middle of things before we even realize what we're doing, right? Like we're ordering something and it's in the cart and we're about to click buy online and you're like, I don't even need this. Like, what am I doing? But you've been sucked in by an ad and you've gone down a 15-minute wormhole and suddenly you're researching lawnmowers and you're like, why? It's, I don't know. There's a lot of life that we live unconsciously, and that always really interests me, just human behavior stuff. So,
and that's really the case with Beth, is she's not self-aware or even self-analytical at all for a very long period of time. Until she starts to be, she doesn't really have a chance to work out the tangle that is her life. It's not going to work itself out. Her brother and sister-in-law aren't going to work it out for her. She has to suddenly say, where am I? I mean, I wandered down to the point I'm at now. One, how did I get here? And two, do I really want to be here? And when her self-awareness starts, everybody's going to empathize, because they're going to say, all right, you're waking up now, and here you see a potential for what you could do with yourself, and you're going to move in that direction. Now I really do like you and root for you, and I'm encouraged by you. But she takes a while to get to that start to wake up point. And that's great. That's perfectly fine. Because a lot of us do sort of, as Thoreau said, lead unexamined lives.
Yeah, she needed some therapy. And also you do see like the people like that who, they really do kind of live their lives like as a victim, and they sort of, and again, like sometimes there are, moments in your life where you are victimized and you have to kind of figure out what to do. But if you live your whole life really reactionary like that, and you never, as you said, do any self-examination, it's like, at some point, like the car's not going to drive itself, although I guess they're going to now. But it's
Those
not.
just came to Charlotte, North Carolina this week. I'm very not excited.
I love that you had mentioned Mark Ruffalo's character and You Can Count on Me. That was obviously a huge influence on me for this film. And I think kind of similar to Beth, it's like sometimes there are just people who like, they just can't ever quite get it together. Like we all know those people. Sometimes I do think there's an element of luck. Some people seem to be lucky and other people seem to not be lucky. And why that is, like there are people who just seem to always have clouds over their heads. And
it's harder when they're well-intentioned, good, decent people. It's easier if they're malevolent or cranky, and you can obviously attribute.
You're like, they're bringing it on themselves. Yeah.
Well, of course you're struggling. You're an ass. But that isn't something that with Beth you ever say, or with Ruffalo's character in You Can Count on Me. You just sit there going, oh man, what is up with you? But not out of anger or bitterness or meanness. They just... They have all the pieces. They're just not making the puzzle.
Yeah. And Los Angeles, I think, as a city is a bit like that. Definitely in my 20s, I feel like I had some Beth days where it was sort of like, you leave an audition that didn't go well and you have a parking ticket, and then a bird poops on your shoulder of your nice new dress. And, and it's like, what's happening? Like, come on, God, like cut me a break. It's sort of, you do kind of have those. And I think that's just like an element of like, city life.
Well, I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but the potential for happiness that she encounters is not something unique to LA or any other place. She in your director's statement, you quoted his Dark Materials, which I don't know as a play, but I've read the great trilogy by Philip Pullman.
I'm like, oh no, you have access to that.
The happiness that we're going to make has to be made where we are. And okay, Beth isn't going to get a job as the principal communications person for Warner Brothers, but she's going to get some kind of a job that she can enjoy at some level and will give her some financial stability and some opportunity to reunite with and take care of her daughter. And Birdie's going to be fine with that. So I think that, yeah, LA might not be the right place for her, but that jumbled quality that we see in her psyche, that could be happening anywhere. I grew up in a farm town of 5,000 people and about 20,000 cows. And I had kids in my high school class who were exactly as jumbled, some of them in exactly the same way, as that character. So I think that's a universal aspect of confusion and lostness. And it's example of, it's a little bit exaggerated by being in a big city where there's pressure on you. But to me, that's something you can find in the smallest of towns. one of which I grew up in. Yes, New Jersey has towns with 5,000 people and 20,000 cows, or did when I was a boy.
Yeah, I was gonna say now maybe.
South Jersey.
Maybe 10,000 deer. All deer by the side of the road. I mean, I love his Dark Materials. I love Philip Pullman. And the play adaptation that the National Theater did is incredible. If you have access to those scripts, they're amazing and well worth reading. But that kind of theme, right? That theme, as you said, of like trying to find happiness where you are. I think that's something I've always had a really hard time doing. Like I'm always someone who's like looking to the future. What do I want to do next? Always making plans. I don't really live in the present. I feel like I've had so many people suggest that Power of Now book to me that I still haven't read. And it's maybe this year I'm going to read it. But as you said, it's like you can find happiness where you are, or at least you can try.
Or at least plant your feet and get a little, and then you see some more in the distance, and then you work toward it. Yeah. But my brother, who's now a very happily married man living in Oregon, when he was younger, nothing pleased him. He wasn't settled. He moved around. He didn't like any of the jobs he had. And until he began to get a sense of enjoyment out of his day-to-day life, he did not have a successful long-term relationship. And when he did, he married somebody and they've been together for 20 some years and they're perfect for each other. But he had to have the capacity to appreciate and to be satisfied and to be happy before he could be happy. That sounds obvious, but in a way it's not. If you don't have the ability to be happy, then nothing's going to make you that way.
Yeah. And I think Beth is definitely someone who's looking to be rescued, which, fair enough. It's like, the characters, like they went through this trauma, they lost their parents at a really young age. Like it makes sense to, if that's happened to you, to maybe want someone to come and save you, to like not have to go through anything like that again, to kind of protect you. And unfortunately for her, she picked the wrong guy and, and then kind of had a child before she was really out of her own sort of childhood. So the film's also kind of a lot about motherhood and how you're going to sort of evolve alongside your children. We always think of our parents as like gods, right? And then you realize as you get older, you're like, God, I was so mean to my parents, like we should have been a lot more understanding.
Well, let me ask you a question. This is interesting because a lot of in your director's statement, it seemed like a lot of the film came out of your experience and your own personal awareness of what Beth was going through. You're not, I infer, a mom. So where did you go to sort of get that grounding to make that relationship work on screen?
Well, I don't know if it was that personal. I mean, I think maybe the emotional, maybe aspects of it were, but it's like,
I don't mean that you lived in a car.
Yeah, I've never lived in my car. Thank God. I've never, I have a great relationship with my sister.
But more the sense of, you talked about hitting bottom and being dissatisfied with your life. That emotional aspect of it seems to ring very much from your own experience, yes. Whereas the motherhood aspect cannot, I'm inferring.
Yeah. So I think the motherhood aspect is just, I was at a time in my life where almost all of my female friends were making decisions on whether or not to have children, which is kind of what happens when you get to your mid-30s. You sort of have to you don't have to make a decision. Obviously, women have children into their 40s, especially now with lots of different options. But if you're thinking that you might want to have a child or give birth to a child, you do have to kind of start thinking about that, in your mid-30s. So all my friends essentially were either having a child or making a decision around that issue. And so motherhood was just sort of in the conversation much more than amongst my female friends, much more than it ever was when we were in our 20s. There is a biological clock that does tick, whether or not you want a child or not. But, it's sort of in us, as women, you do sense it, you do feel it. Yeah. I think the motherhood thing, it just interested me, I think, kind of being at that point in my life where I was making my own decision around that. And then I think portraying kind of two really different, journeys with motherhood, right? Like we have Beth, who has Birdie, her daughter, which was unplanned. And, she's sort of shirking some responsibilities there, maybe a lot of responsibilities there, and doesn't really know how to be a mother. And hasn't even, like you said, done any self-examination around that topic. Beth's not the kind of person who bought like what to expect when you're expecting. Do you know what I mean? Like, she didn't do any prep. There was no research, you know?
She didn't expect to be expecting.
No, she didn't expect to be expecting. And she certainly didn't like thoughtfully sit down and think like, how do I want to parent, you know, in a very, in sort of like that modern sense, right? Where now people are sort of like, there's like modalities, right? Of like how you parent and courses that people take. So
because it's a job.
It is, yeah.
Like any job, you can train for it and you can do it well or badly, and you can learn from your experience and improve your performance in it or not. But it really is a job.
Yeah. And it's definitely something I think that we're so much more, well, like you said, yeah, fatherhood and motherhood, we consider it a job now. Whereas, you know, what Charles Dickens times, it's like, oh man, another mouth to feed, you know, number 10, you know, child number 10.
But they're 8 years old. They can work in the shoe blacking.
Yeah.
So they'll earn their keep.
Well, we can send them off to the workhouse, or the littlest one can sell matches on the corner. You know, it's like post sort of child labor laws, like the concept of a childhood, right? That's relatively new sort of in the course of human history, right? Only the last probably 150 years. So anyway.
And Beth didn't have one, really. A childhood involves having a parent, not just being young. Anybody is young. But to have a childhood, you have to have parenthood at the same time. Beth didn't get that. So no surprise, she doesn't really know how to give it to her birdie.
Yeah, I think, and then she was kind of just raised by her older brother, not having a female mother figure after the age of 10 to like watch. And like, especially as a girl, you know, when you're 10, you're sort of like, those are the last few years of like your girlhood, right? And then, you know, puberty, and then suddenly you're dealing with womanhood, and to not have any kind of older female to kind of walk you through that, right? To even, I think when like Anthony and I got on a Zoom and we were talking a little bit about the characters before we started shooting, I think I remember making some joke that I was like, yeah, can you imagine when like Beth got her period and had to like ask her older brother to like go buy her pads? You know what I mean? It's like, we were sort of like, how awkward, right? Like how weird to sort of have this like, you know, whatever, 10 years older brother that's like kind of also your dad figure, and how for him as well, how unfair that is. And like, you know, that's going to kind of forever put a barrier between you and your brother's sisterhood. Like it's always going to feel, there's always going to be like a level of complication there. It's sort of like your brother, father mixed together. But then also what I was going to say about the motherhood thing was sort of contrasting Beth with Ben's wife's character, Stacy, and their journey. And, you know, they're going through IVF, they've done multiple rounds, and Ben is like desperate for a child. Like he would love to be a father, and they are
and his clock is ticking.
Yeah, he is, you know, yeah, he is.
Because he's going to be, you know, in his late 60s when his child graduates college, if that.
Yeah, he is sort of, his clock is sort of ticking, and he and kind of Stacy, like he's sort of well aware that like they kind of can't pause the IVF, like they've got to keep going, you know, if it's going to happen. And then for, you know, Stacy as well, it's like, that's incredibly frustrating to be like being injected, you know, nightly with hormones to try to become fertile. And you're seeing this person kind of throw away their child. I think that contrast I thought would be really interesting.
It's interesting because I was waiting for through the whole film for Ben and Stacy, either of them, to say, well, you know, we could certainly adopt. My mom was adopted. And so if someone in your family has been adopted and you see people trying endlessly to have a child, you want to go up and go, okay, but, you know, my mom was adopted. It turned out great. She was a great mom. You need to adopt. And so when they finally come around to either that or potentially surrogacy as the end result of their struggles, I thought, ooh, at last. You know, that's a difficult journey, but if you can't conceive, there are plenty of children who would be glad to have you as mom and dad. So that the film touched on that, which was a nice ending. It wasn't sort of like, if we don't have a biological child, we're not real parents or we're not fulfilled people. I think sometimes that is the outcome of a film. A lot of the time it's, at last, our miracle child has arrived. And I always want to say, yeah, but if it didn't, you could still be happy. And there are other paths to happiness for you too.
Anthony's character, his response, and I love the way that he kind of plays that scene where he's so relieved, and you see that like, oh, it wasn't really about them having a biological child. It was just that, like, he really wants to be a dad,
Mhm.
with her. Like, he wants to be, have her be a mom. Like, he wants to raise a child. And sort of at the end of the movie, you realize, like, when he's sort of watching Beth and Birdie, that, like, that's kind of all he's ever done. It's like he raised his little sister. He watched her give birth. He kind of has been raising his niece. Like, he's a nurturer, and he really, that's really his purpose in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's very sweet. I like that scene at the end with, I mean, obviously I like it. I wrote it, but I like how the actors play it. And I love how Lana finds all this nuance in Stacy and how she's so relieved, when they have that conversation, that he's okay with it. She's so relieved that he's not going to break down and say, I have to have a biological child. I think that there was miscommunication, obviously, about that, a misunderstanding about that in their relationship. And I like the point that they get to at the end with each other, where it's just like, whatever it is, we will find a way. We will be parents, but, like, we just are going to, like, relax for a little bit. We're going to regroup, work on us, and figure it out.
Isn't the whole movie like that? I mean, Beth also has a "we will find a way" quality at the end to her. I don't know if Birdie's going to stay in that school. Maybe she's not, but she'll stay in a school. And Beth and she will be together. And all of the end of the movie is we have a possibility for what we want and for success, and we're going to move toward it. It's the moving toward it that's when you leave them. Like, there isn't a scene at the end of Ben and Stacy cradling a little bundle of joy. Right. And there isn't a scene of Beth getting a call from somebody going, wait a minute, it is Warner Brothers, and we've had second thoughts about your application. We looked at it again. It's unbelievable. So there is a chance to move in those directions. They are moving in those directions, but there's not a fulfillment. A magic godfather doesn't show up and go, look, Birdie won a contest for a slogan.
Right.
The tuition for her very expensive school. That kind of stuff, which is almost irresistible in mainstream films. You always see that. There would have been a last shot, even just over the credits, of Ben and Stacy hugging an infant or something. And the fact that the film doesn't do that is one of its virtues, because most of us move toward that in our life, but it's the moving that matters, not the fact that we got magic baby.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think there's something, I think, about sort of the little montage at the end of Beth kind of putting her life together a little bit, that I think is really hopeful, where it's like, yeah, she kind of maybe come down from where she was. We obviously never see where she was living before, but, I imagine it was a very nice condo that, she never could have afforded and probably should never have gotten a mortgage on, I think also there's this, like, a lot of snobbery, right? Especially in Los Angeles, about, appearance, what you wear, where you work, how nice is your car, what's your apartment look like?
What does your boyfriend do?
What's your boyfriend do? Right. And it's like, and what kind of car does he drive? And does he have the latest iPhone? It's just like a lot of that nonsense, right? And, not that we don't all like fancy things, because we do, as I look at my own iPhone, but, we like toys and gadgets, but they shouldn't define us, right? These are sort of things designed to make our lives easier, but our worth, our value are certainly not in these, like, status symbols.
I got, about 20 years ago, before I bought the house I'm in now with my wife, I applied to a bunch of newspapers bigger than Charlotte's, and thought, okay, I'm going to be snapped up by Chicago or the Washington Post or whatever. And I didn't get snapped up. And then I realized, okay, well, you're going to be here, and you're not going to be charging ahead and, spending time at the New York Film Festival every day. So what's good about what you have? If later I'd gotten a job in Washington or New York, that would have been lovely too. But I would have been prepared for it, because I was already very comfortable and satisfied with what I have now. And it turned out that was what I kept doing. So if Beth moves up, she should be happy. But if she doesn't move up, she should be happy also. And the film shows us that she'll be okay in either of those two places.
Well, listen, I don't think the Charlotte Observer is nothing,
No. It was lovely, and I had a great time there. And well, I was lucky because I did have some autonomy, and I would go see Mission Impossible Part 18, Chapter A, and at the same
But you
Well,
know,
no, but the thing, and if they're well made, they're very enjoyable.
yeah.
There are good ones and bad ones. But I also was then able to negotiate that and go, well, there's 4 films opening this week I'm interested in, and the 2 big ones are these. There's a medium-sized one and a little one. And most of the time they'd say, sure, as long as you make sure that you log in Oppenheimer and Barbie, then go and see Scrap if you think that's interesting for people, and tell them why when you write about it. So that actually, until I retired from film criticism in 2017 because the Observer downsized its staff, like a lot of different newspapers all around America, and then did some freelance work. But up to that point, I did have autonomy, and I was able to say, hey, folks, here's a small one that you maybe should see in addition to these big ones that I know you're going to see, and here's how they all pan out. The hard part as a critic is not saying, okay, this little movie is interesting, but saying it's interesting on its own terms, not, well, I'm going to compare it to Oppenheimer, which had the budget of Bolivia, and every actor that Christopher Nolan ever met was put in it. That's and it's quite good. I'm not making fun of it, but you judge movies at their own level. Scrap would be judged against other small indie films that offer this kind of emotional payoff and thoughtfulness, rather than, well, it's good, but it isn't, Barbie or something. It's kind of a ridiculous comparison.
Yeah. I mean, God, do you know what the budget was on Oppenheimer? I'm almost scared to.
I can't even imagine. I hope it's in 8 figures.
It is $100 million was the budget.
But it's not better than it would be if you had only spent 60 million. Okay, you couldn't make that film for 4 million, but whether you made it for 100 million or 150 million, at a certain point, it all runs together.
Well, I will let you go. I know we've been talking for a while, and you have a life, but thank you.
I'm retired.
You're like, no, I have no life now.
I have a great life with my wife and cats and all the books that I ever wanted to read. Yes, Don Quixote is as good as everyone said. Yeah. When you're retired, that's what you get to find out. Yeah,
you don't get The Power of Now sitting on your coffee table for like 3.5 years. It's gathering dust.
No, you can read that immediately. That's all.
I know I have to. I feel like I've shamed myself after this conversation. Yeah. Well, thank you again.
But you've made a movie about the power of now, so that you've done that.
Yeah, I've done it. I've done the work.
Indeed.
God. Well, right. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you, and I hope to go to the Charlotte Film Festival with Julian.
Well, and now I'm going to go back, since you made it, and look at Julian, because I didn't see all the shorts. There were 400 shorts.
Oh, wow.
And I saw 100. They had multiple judges. They had a whole ton of judges. They wanted every judge. They wanted 3 judges per film. So I didn't see Julian, but now I will, because I still have access to it on Film Freeway.
It's very good. Now, it's very I won't spoil it, but it's very goofy, very surreal.
I'm for that, and I'm looking forward to Seance, not jokingly.
Oh, thank you.
That looks like the kind of film I generally like anyway, because I like psychological thrillers, if you want to call it that. And I'm already a little bit prejudiced in its favor, so I'm looking forward to that too.
Well, hopefully we're in post-production on it, and then hopefully it'll premiere next year and be doing festivals in, sort of 2024, 2025, which is kind of insane when you think about films, you're like, oh, this is going to be like 3 years of my life, but that's what happens.
That's okay. If they're good, they were worth it.